Peace, Sakai. This is Yeshi. I hope you're doing well. Um, this is my offering for week 6 in community mental health from prison to home, the effect of incarceration and reentry on children, families, and communities. Um, I am drawn towards sending video entries for my responses and for my responses and reflections to the each week's readings. It's a time saver one, and I find that I'm better to able to articulate myself verbally sometimes rather than writing, because it sometimes takes me way too long to like produce a written work, and I don't have that kind of time. So I hope you're okay with me submitting my reflections this way, and I will send my aesthetic response in the same way that I have been sending it. So this particular topic, I think it affects everyone, whether you have someone that you know personally that is in prison, or if you've seen a neighbor be arrested, and or just living in a big city where you walk down a street and you know that this big building on your right is actually like central bookings. Um, at 19, I remember I had gone to college for 2 years, took a year off, and my aunt was a correction officer at Rikers Island. And she told me about a job that was with, it was with a hospital, but that served Rikers Island. So I worked on Rikers Island, but for Montefiore Hospital. It was a very interesting job to have at 19. That's all I'm going to say. Um, what my job was that inmates had to get chest x-rays when they came onto the island, and I worked with the radiologist, checking films for airborne diseases, tuberculosis, HIV, things of that nature, and based on those chest X-rays, that was the way that inmates were placed on the island. It's such a crazy process, but this is what went on. And because a lot of the inmates didn't know their rights, they didn't know that they could have waived. Um, they didn't have to get the chest X-ray. They could have decided that that's not what they wanted to do, but a lot of them didn't know that they had that option. Um, Prison is one of the places where slavery is still legal, you know, where you can have, people bound and on lockdown for 23 hours a day without any social contact, sunlight, anything of that nature. So, you think about that formula. So how I just try. It's interesting to me that they call it rehabilitation. There is nothing repairing about that experience. And the hugest issue is that there are no strongholds in place to really support true integration back into society or into the free world. I know there at one point in time, there were programs that where an inmate could get their GED, get their bachelor's, even get their doctorate. That has been cut so long ago, and even providing them with regular jobs or job training or skill building or having the proper therapeutic interventions there to really assist them in becoming more than their situation. It's just not present. You have a lot of aggression and hostility because you have all of these beings, these light beings of energy being contained. And at a certain point in time, they just start to butt heads, and that's including the staff. That's like who helps the helper. A lot of the staff come from these same neighborhoods, are dealing with a lot of the same traumas. It's just that the only difference is that, you know, they happen to be the ones who are in power and take out a lot of their aggression on these inmates, and nobody is saying anything because it's part of the job. So there's a lot of corruption in reference to just the whole system. you know, um, and how it affects families. I mean, you have children who are losing their fathers and mothers and not really being given the opportunity, the parents not being given the opportunity to be more than their situations. I really feel like if there were programs in place, supports in place that were providing inmates with job skills, with education, the opportunity to get their GED, at the very least, the opportunity for them to get college credit or to work on their degrees while in prison. Um, and then on top of that, to really deal with, forget about the crime, but let's just talk about your narrative, giving them the opportunity to write their own story. Like, who are you? And really go into creating the path as to like why they are there, and then starting to think about who they want to become. Who, without all of this, if they had the opportunity to be someone else, who would they be? And then understanding that a great deal of them would not know that they deserve to be anybody but who they are, and dealing with that. I think that is a commitment that many in the penal system will shy away from because of the time and effort that it will require in order to make sure that it's successful. Because if we're really about saying rehabilitation, then there has to be more effort put towards actually making sure that when these people come out into the world, that they have they have a chance, you know, that mentally and emotionally they are they have a sense of themselves and a strong sense of their identity to be in the world, and to know that that situation was something that occurred as a result of my anger or my misunderstanding of myself, um, the hurt that lived in me that wanted to hurt someone else. You know, I think just having that understanding helps them to put that in an external place so it doesn't necessarily become who they are. Um, that needs to be there. They need to be treated like people. They need to be treated like they matter. They need to know that somebody cares about whether they wake up the next day. They need to have things put in place for them to look forward to. You know, I think it's important for them to cook meals together, to sit down and eat food together. I think it's important for each day to consist of them feeling like they are a part of something great that they've created. Just because they're in prison doesn't mean that, okay, they committed this terrible crime. But in order to stop them from, the continuum, to end the pattern of behavior, the pathology, like, what are we going to do while they're sitting here? Because all they're doing now is just kind of brooding in this anger, brooding in this aggression. And you got all of these young men and women who are brooding in all of their anger, brooding in all of their disappointment, brooding in all of their shame and their guilt and their fear. And they have nowhere to put it. So they just inflict it on each other, staff included. So, yeah, without going too overboard, I didn't want to make this longer than 10 minutes, and I feel like that's probably kind of long. Yeah, and I thought about Khalif Browder and what he went through in the penal system, and then coming out and asking for the assistance, saying that he needed a therapist constantly, being in solitary for 23 hours a day, and not being really found guilty on anything. Because he was at Rikers, and Rikers is usually kind of a place where people are being held until they are sent to federal. So if his crime was so heinous and he was in lockdown for 23 hours a day, it's like he was never sentenced. He wasn't provided with the therapeutic interventions that he needed. He came out, he was just kind of put out, back out into the world. There was he'd been traumatized so much that it was very difficult for him to acclimate. He did his best. He went back to school, tried to get himself together, but there was a disconnect. And he ended up taking his own life just because all of it was just too much to deal with. What do we say about that? Shawshank Redemption, that came to mind, that particular movie, where you had these men in prison 30, 40, 50, some even more years than that. The prison must have had an alliance with some sort of halfway house where they were all sent to the same room, the same depressed room, and they were all, the same job. It's almost like it's everyone has to be placed on a track that honors who they are individually. I think it's very difficult to lump them into the same category and assume that the requirements are all the same because they're all just prisoners and they're lucky, because I think that's what the attitude is at times as well. So I could go on and on about this. I could go on and on about this. And I guess I apologize for the length of this video, but I do have to say this. I have a neighbor who has been dealing with mental illness for probably on and off for most of his life. So much to the point that it's pretty customary, especially it's been quiet now, but in the past it was customary for the cops to be here at least once a week. And I remember him being outside and a group of officers kind of, in clusters, standing around him, like laughing, making joke of it because they had been called so much for him. It was just like a routine that they came here. They knew exactly who it was. And it was just this regular routine of him being picked up, taken to a mental hospital, and then he'd be out in a couple of days. It's just a regular routine, and it doesn't work. He needs to go somewhere where he's in a residential facility, in a different place, maybe seeing some mountains, something beautiful, and being reminded of who he is independent of his diagnosis, of the crimes that he may have committed, all of it. So it's such a messed up system for sure. And I feel like most community servants, police officers, EMT workers need more training in community mental health as well as compassion training, because many of them get a badge, get a gun, whatever it is that they have, uniform, and that ends up being what makes them feel like they can bully and mistreat individuals. And I feel like if, we're in pain, all we know how to do is inflict pain. And, there has to be some kind of stronghold put in place to support the helper as well as the one that's being helped. So I'm going to stop there. I apologize for the length of this video, but it's one of those topics that's really difficult to condense. So talk to you soon.